Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
The contemporary art world is vibrant and booming as never before. It's a 21st century phenomenon, a global industry in its own right. Brilliant Ideas looks at the artists at the heart of this. Artists with a unique power to provoke, astonish, and inspire. In this programme, pioneering film artist Diana Thater. Celebrated new media artist Diana Thater has been creating video, film, and installation-based work since the early 1990s.
Diana's work is a cluster of sensations, and if you stand in it, you study it, you let it wash over you, you actually comprehend something in a very multifaceted way that you would not from another work.
One of the singularly most exciting things about Diana Thater's work is how it takes on deep content in a form that's exceptionally beautiful.
I remember being in New York and in grad school and walking up Green Street and seeing these glowing colors of orange and yellow sort of emanating from the facade of a building in Soho. And I went inside, and inside there were projections of flowers, of plants, and somehow the space seemed to breathe.
All artists hope that their work changes the way people see the world. And all artists hope that people walk in and say, oh my God, I've never seen anything quite like this before.
Based in LA, Diana Thater has exhibited all over the world. Now, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art is hosting a mid-career retrospective, her most high-profile and comprehensive show to date.
Diana Thater is one of the most significant artists, not only working today, but really in Los Angeles. She has taught at Art Center College for a long time. She has influenced a lot of younger artists. And yet in her own city of Los Angeles, she had never had a big show. So it seemed that for LACMA, it would be interesting to give her a large exhibition.
Oftentimes with exhibitions where you're working with a living artist working in drawing, painting, sculpture, a lot of the work can be done sort of, via telephone, via email, and really talking through the ideas in the space, and of course meeting in person, walking through the space. But in Diana's case, each of these works reinstalled in the survey was very different from their original presentations and other manifestations in other spaces.
They're not site-specific, they're site-dependent. They depend upon architecture in order to work. And every architecture that I work with is slightly different. The kind of great thing about building a physical model, a three-dimensional model, is that you can get a feel for the space. And if you work with architectural space as much as I do, a model is a very familiar thing. The installation is a kind of sculpting. So once I've got the shoot and once I've got the edit, I sort of sculpt the work in installation. So it's really a part of my process. I don't just go and put something in to a space. The first time I install a piece is when I finish it.
Museum director Michael Govan has been a fan of Diana's work for many years, first encountering it at Dear Art Foundation in New York in 2001.
I had never seen anything like it. I had seen video art, I had seen sculptural installation, I had seen light art. But this idea of a moving image in space interacting with architecture utterly amazed me.
I use color a lot in exhibitions of my work, color in the pieces, in order to let the viewer know that he or she is inside of a work of art at all times. So when they come into the room, even when they approach a piece like this, which seems to be very sculptural, that they're inside the work at all times and they're always a part of it.
Titled The Sympathetic Imagination, Diana's expansive show, supported by the Hyundai project, takes in 22 works across her career to date.
It's kind of scary because you have to sort of, as an artist, you have to reassess your life and your career and think about what you've done and what it means. I mean, I can think about an individual piece, but thinking about my body of work is a lot more difficult. And it requires you to think about your life, you know, and the trajectory of your life. When I was growing up, I loved two things. I loved movies and I loved art. And I just always wanted to be an artist. So I went to undergrad at NYU and I got my degree in art history. And then I worked for a few years, and then I decided, I took art classes at night, and then I decided I wanted to go to graduate school to become a real artist. One of my teachers was Patty Podesta, and Patty, of course, was a film and video artist before she became this sort of famous production designer. And she was my teacher, and she encouraged me to make film and video.
She knew it immediately, I think. She made some really wonderful pieces at the beginning and was always really interested in sort of interrogating the apparatus, you know? It was the tool that allowed her to look into the questions she was already interested in.
Once I picked up a camera, I never put it down, and I've never made anything else since.
Diana was really, you know, starting to do these installation kind of pieces, and she bought her own equipment with her last student loan. And so she was able to approach a gallery and say, I want to do this installation with you, and I have the equipment and the know-how. And that was one of the big hurdles to getting galleries to participate in this kind of work, and she, you know, just mowed down that barrier immediately.
Probably the first work I got a lot of attention for is called O Fifi, 5 Days in Claude Monet's Garden. And that's the piece that people first paid attention to.
She decided to take a video camera with all of its handheld movements and film Giverny, Monet's garden. The work that results is 2 video images opposed in their construction. One is a single projector showing the garden split apart in the video image into red, green, and blue, the components of video, so that you literally get an impressionist video. Opposing that image is another image that looks at first as a clear image, not pulled apart. And then you realize by walking in front of it, something happens, that your own shadow breaks into the opposites, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And you realize that is an image projected from 3 projectors, red, green, and blue, onto one image. So in the same work, she has deconstructed video and reconstructed video, one more beautiful than the next, and I'm not sure which one.
I was very interested when I first started working in examining the parameters of my medium, because there are sort of boundaries to it. You know, mediums become interesting when we find the boundaries and then break through them. So the whole beginning of my career is examining these kinds of boundaries.
Having focused on landscapes and still lives in her early work, Diana turned her lens to the animal kingdom, a subject that would become a central pillar in her life, profoundly impacting her work and politics.
Ideas. Ideas.
American artist Diana Thater is the subject of a major new exhibition at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Tracing the evolution of Diana's working practice, it's her biggest show to date.
From the very beginning of working on this exhibition, it became very clear that it was not going to be about a selection of the sort of most popular pieces and representing them in the space, but rather to show how she's been a pioneer in film and video for the past 25 years. When I say pioneer, I mean in the relationship to subject, the relationship to the viewer, and how these aspects in her work have kind of developed and evolved over the years.
Already fascinated by nature and the environment, Diana shifted her focus from still lives and landscapes to the animal kingdom, changing her outlook forever.
I'd always been interested in animals and animal subjectivity and human relationships with animals, animal culture. So for the first few years when I got out of school, when I was in school and then when I got out of school, I was making work with the landscape. And then the first piece I made with animals was China. This is a piece that I made with two trained wolves, one named Shiloh, a gray wolf, and one named China, a white wolf. The idea is that wolves are pack animals, so they're simultaneously individuals and a group. And I wanted to make these two wolves into their own pack. So you have 6 screens, 6 projections, 2 wolves that become 12. China is a very young wolf, and she wouldn't pay attention to anything she was supposed to be doing. So because the whole day became about where's China, what's China doing, someone get China, I named it for her.
Already an animal lover, Diana became a committed environmental activist, turning her back on working with trained animals for ethical reasons. Her work now depicts animals in their natural habitats, presenting them on their own terms as complex subjects with a worldview very different from our own.
Art is, after all, communication. I mean, that's what it is. So I'm ultimately attempting to communicate with people about a very specific and complicated thing. This is a piece that I made with free dolphins in the Caribbean. The person I worked with on this project is Rick O'Barry. Rick O'Barry is famed as a dolphin rights activist, and he knew this pod of dolphins very well. And you can see that there are 4 projections, and the room is lit. Because the work is primarily green and blue, because it's shot underwater, I counter that with a complementary color, which is red through magenta. And of course, I utilize the image of the sun, because for dolphins, who are mammals, the sun is very important because they have to stay warm. And so the final scene in the piece is all of these dolphins rising up to the sun. One of the things that's very important to me in my work is this concept of beauty. And I find dolphins tremendously beautiful creatures, and I'm interested in the social structure of the groups because they live in family groups, very, very similar to human beings, and they have very complex language.
When she's using animals in her work, she's thinking about how every living thing has a different consciousness. And I think this idea of different points of view, which is dramatized by animals, is the key to understanding the politics and the meaning of her work.
I want to break down the distance between humans and animals. And one thing we could possibly do, and I think it's vital at this point in history, is to see the natural world differently, to change the way we see the natural world. I mean, we're in a time of crisis, absolute crisis. We treat animals as objects. We kill them, we cut them apart, we perform medical experiments on them, scientific experiments on them. And that's the sort of hubris of humanity. And I advocate for a much more sympathetic position in relation to other living beings and in relation to the natural world as a whole.
It's a voice for these animals, but also not anthropomorphizing them or allowing them to be cute or, or other than the wild things that they are.
People always ask me things like, you know, did you get to pet the tigers? And, you know, my response is always, you ever thought about, you know, you ever met a tiger? You don't want to pet a tiger. You just want to stay as far away from them as possible because they're fierce and huge and gnarly. So you would never want to do that. But people think because I get close to them that I have this kind of, that they're like pets. And they're not pets.
Diana's work has drawn her into many potentially life-threatening situations. But it was making a piece of art about a man-made disaster that took her to one of the most poisoned sites on Earth.
Ideas.
Diana Thater is one of the most influential artists of her generation. Using light, color, and an array of filmic techniques, she pushes the boundaries of how moving images are experienced, taking both artistic and physical risks to create her work.
There's no other part of cultural production where you can take risks the way you can in the art world. I think Diana is completely aware of this and you know, situates herself within that idea. When she started with these kinds of politics, she was one of the only people like putting herself on the line in order to sort of like produce this kind of unmitigated image of these situations.
In 2010, Diana traveled to Ukraine to document the area surrounding the decommissioned Chernobyl power station, the site of one of the worst nuclear disasters in history.
It's not really like anything else. It's an abandoned city. It's an abandoned, poisoned city. So it's crumbling.
It's a work about politics, apocalypse, decay, life, and it is so complicated. It is even literally multi-layered and is set in a ruined movie theater. So the idea of the moving image in the theater with layers of politics and exterior and landscape and horses and decay is exceptionally complex and moving.
Propaganda now being put out by the Ukrainian government is that Chernobyl is a tourist zone. You can go in for a day and visit Chernobyl on these little tours. But it's incredibly dangerous. It's not safe, and it's incredibly dangerous for the animals. The animals go there and live there despite the fact that it's completely poisoned. Of course, they don't know that it's completely poisoned because they need space to live. The scientists with whom I spoke said, please don't portray it as this place in which nature is regenerating, because it's not. And that's the important thing. And I had to promise them that I wouldn't present it as a place where nature was thriving, because it's not thriving. You know, it's a dangerous place for us, it's a dangerous place for them, but they have no other place to go.
Despite the danger of radiation poisoning, Diana spent 7 days living in the exclusion zone, documenting and exploring the ruins.
We had Geiger counters, we wore, you know, rubber boots, plastic coveralls, gloves, things like that, because most of the radiation is in the soil. So you try to stay on the streets, and you try to stay out of the grass, you have to stay out of the forest. So there were a couple of places where I got out, and I had a young cameraman assisting me, and he was about 22, 23. And Vasily, who was our guide, wouldn't let him get out of the car. And he said to him, you know, you'll never have children if you do what she's doing, because I was laying on the ground and shooting and everything. And he said to Volya, you stay in the car, because if you want to have children, stay in the car. But he would let me go wherever I wanted. But I was, you know, I was there for that purpose, so he let me do what I wanted. The one sort of really bad thing I did was, without thinking, I picked an apple off of a tree and ate an apple. And they eat them, but they peel them. So you peel it first, and I just sort of ate the apple, and I turned around, everyone was looking at me, and they were like, Diana, why did you just do that? It was a really good apple, too. But yeah, sometimes they do things thoughtlessly, of course, and that's why I have to be with guides and scientists and specialists to keep me from doing something stupid, you know.
Chernobyl is one of 22 key works in Diana's enormous LACMA show, the museum's largest ever exhibition dedicated to a female artist.
I've seen artists and architects and older people just amazed by the use of space and trying to figure out, are the walls painted? Where does the color come from? Where is that image that's floating around coming from? It's been an amazing experience to see the reactions.
There is no language, they're silent works, but somehow there is this kind of odd beauty combined with maybe a moroseness, maybe a joy. But all the while, it's always about being inside of the artwork.
It never was a great ambition of mine to have people playing in my work, but I've come to appreciate it. Installation, as I make it, as I conceive it, involves the viewer at all times. The work is never complete without viewers. I mean, I have a lot of fun doing what I do. I mean, sometimes it's dangerous, sometimes it's exciting, and sometimes it's just plain fun.